The stargazer's awakening in a gentle village cradled between forested hills and the vast open sea. A quiet stargazer made his home. Each night, when the world had gone to sleep and the stars began to whisper their secrets, he would wander beneath the sky. He had devoted his life to the cosmos, walking the meadows and ridges, mapping constellations and dreaming of distant worlds. His cottage sat on the edge of the village, a small white home with a sloped roof and a single window through which he often gazed. Inside, his world was simpler: desk, a chair, and a bed for resting his eyes between long nights of watching the heavens. But one evening, as he traced the arc of Orion across the twilight canvas, he tripped over a mossy stone and landed softly on the earth. Instead of rising quickly, he paused. He felt the cool soil beneath his hands and noticed a cluster of tiny wildflowers blooming beside him. Their petals glowed faintly in the moonlight, and their fragrance reached him like a soft, beckoning lullaby. He lay there for a long while, the stars above twinkling in their silent rhythm, and the earth below pulsing with gentle life. For the first time, he wondered what he had been missing while always looking up. The next morning, he awoke, not in the middle of the afternoon as he usually did, but with the first blush of dawn. The sky was painted in soft pastels, and the air was filled with birdsong and the scent of baking bread from nearby kitchens. As he stepped outside, neighbors greeted him with warmth and surprise. A baker offered him a slice of warm, crusty bread. A child tugged his hand and led him to a garden blooming with color. An old friend invited him to sit under a fig tree, sipping honeyed tea as bees danced lazily in the sunlight. Everywhere he turned, the stargazer saw life not just in the heavens, but here around him, beneath his feet, and within every smiling face. That night, he returned to his usual spot on the hillside. He still looked up, but he also listened to the rustle of leaves, the hush of wind, the low hum of nighttime life around him. The stars were still beautiful, but now so was the world he walked upon. He lay back in the grass, a blanket beneath him and a warm cup in his hand. And as he watched the sky, he smiled, for he had learned that wonder was not only above, but everywhere. And with that peaceful thought, he drifted gently into sleep, under the same stars that had always been there, now shining both above and within. The day the sky waited, there came a day unlike any other, when the stargazer chose not to rise with the moon. For reasons he couldn't quite explain, he stayed in bed that evening, watching the last hints of orange and pink fade into the night. His telescope stood idle by the window, untouched. Instead of venturing out, he listened to the sounds of the village winding down, laughter from the inn, the creak of shutters being closed, the hoot of a solitary owl. The sky was still above, the stars still shimmered in quiet glory, but they could wait. The next morning, the stargazer rose with the sun. The light felt warmer than usual, golden and embracing. He stretched and walked outside, feeling the cobblestones under his feet as though for the first time. Children ran past him, chasing each other with ribbons and wooden hoops. A woman nearby swept her porch, humming a tune as sweet as spring. He wandered toward the square where merchants were just beginning to set up. The scent of baking bread, rosemary, and lavender hung in the air. A potter waved him over to admire his work mugs, glazed with swirls of blue that reminded him of galaxies. "You should have this one," the potter said with a smile, handing him a mug still warm from the kiln. With the gift in hand, he continued walking through the village. The trees arched over the path like cathedral ceilings, their leaves whispering softly. A painter sat near the fountain, sketching the scene with fluid strokes. The stargazer sat beside her, watching as the painting took shape, a portrait of the very morning they were living. The hours passed like petals on a stream, floating gently. When the sun reached its highest point, he returned home and brewed tea in his new mug, sitting on the steps and feeling its warmth spread through his hands and chest. He didn't miss the stars. He knew they were there, waiting. The sky was patient. That night, he returned to the hillside, not to chase the stars, but to greet them. He lay in the grass, the air filled with the scent of pine and evening mist. The constellations emerged one by one, like old friends showing up fashionably late. But he no longer felt the rush to name them, to study, to record. Instead, he simply watched. The sky waited for him, just as he had waited for it. And as sleep overtook him, the stars shimmered a little closer, as if they too had missed him. He dreamt that night not of distant galaxies, but of the village, of warm bread and blue mugs, of leaves whispering stories only he could hear. The sky had waited, and now he had found a new rhythm, one that included both above and below, the night and the day, the stars and the soil. And with that balance, he finally slept without searching, cradled by the earth, and gently watched over by the sky, the temple beneath the sun, one golden afternoon. The stargazer wandered farther than usual from his home, led by a quiet curiosity he couldn't quite name. The sun was high but gentle, casting a shimmering veil over the hills and rooftops of his village. A soft breeze danced through the cypress trees, guiding him up a stone path he had not traveled in years. The path wound gently upward toward the highest point in the village, where the Temple of the Sun stood. It was a place built not for worship alone, but for gathering, for silence, and for marveling at the gifts of daylight. As he climbed the last few steps, he passed between tall marble columns etched with symbols of sunflowers, olive branches, and golden rays. The open roof of the temple welcomed the sky, allowing the sunlight to pour in like a blessing. The air inside was cool and fragrant, with old stone and fresh herbs left as offerings. He paused at the center, where a shallow pool of clear water reflected the sun like a second sky. Around it were benches carved from smooth stone, warmed by the sun and softened by age. He sat down, letting the light touch his face, his shoulders, his palms. He listened, not for stars or winds or distant echoes, but for the world around him now. The quiet chirp of cicadas, the shuffle of a pilgrim's sandals, the distant laughter of children playing below. He had always sought silence in the stillness of night, but this was a different kind of peace, sunlit and wide open. A kindly elder approached, robes trailing along the floor. She offered him a bowl of cool water infused with lemon and mint. "The temple belongs to everyone," she said with a smile, "even those who chase stars." They sat together in companionable silence. He dipped his fingers into the pool and watched the ripples spread outward. They reminded him of how light travels across space, slow and persistent. How moments, too, ripple through time. As the sun began to shift toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the floor, the elder stood. "There is a joy in letting the sun speak," she said, "and in learning to listen." The stargazer nodded, feeling the truth of her words settled gently in his chest. When he left the temple, the world seemed somehow quieter and more vibrant. The sky above was a soft gradient, a prelude to twilight. He walked slowly home, pausing often to notice the flutter of wings, the whisper of grass, the warmth of stone. That night, he did not rush to his telescope. Instead, he sat by his window, cradling a warm cup of tea, and watched the last golden rays slip behind the hills. Only then, when the stars began to rise, did he step outside. And even then, he did not search. He simply looked up and received the sky as a gift offered, not to be studied, but to be shared. And when he finally lay down to sleep, the sun's warmth still lingered in his memory, wrapping him in a peace he had never known. He slept deeply, dreaming not only of stars, but of the sunlit temple and the sound of silence echoing softly within.
The Feast of Earthly Stars, it began with an invitation, a folded piece of parchment tucked beneath the stargazer's door, held in place by a smooth, sun-warmed stone. The note was simple and handwritten. "Tonight, join us where the earth touches the sky. Bring nothing but your presence. Curious and quietly flattered, The stargazer pocketed the message. That evening, as twilight fell over the village, he stepped outside. The sky above was already beginning its nightly transformation, melting from rose to lavender to deep indigo. He followed the path past the fields, up a gentle slope where the breeze carried the scent of thyme and sea salt. He soon saw them, his neighbors, old and young, walking with blankets, baskets, and lanterns swaying from their hands. They greeted him with soft smiles and gentle nods. No one spoke loudly. It was as though they all knew this night was meant to be wrapped in peace. At the crest of the hill, a grassy plateau waited for them, bathed in the fading light of dusk. Blankets were spread out in a circle, and from each basket came the delights of the earth. Warm loaves of herbed bread, pots of stew rich with beans and vegetables, plums so ripe their juice dripped like wine, and cheeses wrapped in waxy leaves. Someone uncorked a bottle of golden olive oil, and its fragrance mingled with the breeze. Another sliced figs and offered them to the group. The stargazer found a place beside the baker's family, who passed him a mug of spiced cider and a plate of food piled high with comforting flavors. For a long time, they ate. No one rushed. There were no speeches or performances, only quiet conversations. The sound of cutlery on plates and the hush of wind through tall grasses. Laughter would bubble up now and then, gentle and warm like candlelight. The stargazer tasted everything: olives brined with lemon, barley seasoned with herbs, sun-dried tomatoes bursting with flavor. He chewed slowly, savoring each bite. Across from him, the village tailor hummed an old lullaby, and a child curled beside her with closed eyes. As the sun finally sank beneath the horizon, painting the sky in golds and violets, someone lit a lantern in the center of the circle, then another and another, until the soft glow of firelight matched the stars beginning to emerge above. The villagers leaned back on their blankets, bellies full and hearts open. The stargazer lay on his back, arms folded beneath his head, and for once, he didn't feel the need to study the constellations or name each star. He simply watched. The stars shimmered softly, not as distant objects but as companions. It felt as though they, too, had come to the feast. The stargazer turned his head and saw his neighbors watching the sky with him. Some pointed in awe, others simply gazed. The feast, he realized, was not just of food but of togetherness, of laughter shared in low voices, of stories passed from hand to hand like slices of bread. In the quiet, someone began to sing a soft, wordless tune that carried on the wind. Others joined in, not with words, but with hums and harmony. The sound rose like incense into the sky. The stargazer closed his eyes. He felt the grass beneath him, the warmth of his friends beside him, the hush of stars above. And in that moment, he knew. The universe was not only above, but here, in this circle, in this night, in this feast of earthly stars. He drifted into sleep on the hilltop, not alone with the sky, but surrounded by the constellations of his village, each person, a point of light, glowing softly in the night.
The walk of soft footsteps. One morning, as the mist still lingered between the trees and the world stretched slowly into wakefulness, the stargazer stepped outside his door and took a path he hadn't walked in many years. The air was cool, the kind that gently brushed against the skin and carried the scent of damp earth and pine needles. There was no plan, no destination, only the pull of curiosity and stillness. The villagers had long risen with the sun, tending their gardens, their shops, and their lives. But today, the stargazer wanted to experience what they did awake beneath the morning sky, treading the familiar roads, not by moonlight, but by dawn. His feet followed the narrow stone path that curved between low fences and flower beds heavy with dew. Each step made a soft soundstone, then grass, then dirt. He paid attention to the rhythm of his soles meeting the world, the way each surface yielded beneath him with a different kind of tenderness. He passed by the miller's house, where the air smelled of flour and grain. A soft breeze carried the scent through the lane like a slow-moving river. A pair of kittens played on the stoop, pouncing and tumbling without care. The stargazer paused, smiling quietly, then moved on. At the village green, an old woman swept her porch while singing a lullaby he hadn't heard since he was a boy. She waved to him, and he waved back, the melody staying with him as he walked on. His journey took him past an orchard where sunlight danced through branches and fruit hung like jewels between leaves. He reached out, plucked an apple, and bit into it. The taste was crisp and sharp, full of life. He walked on. Everywhere there were signs of small flower pots, lovingly placed on windowsills, wooden wind chimes that clinked gently in the breeze, and vines trained carefully along garden walls. These were not grand gestures, but quiet acts of love, scattered across the village like stars across a sky. Eventually, the stargazer reached the river. Its current flowed gently over smooth stones, whispering as it went. He removed his shoes and stepped into the water. It was cold, but not unfriendly, just enough to awaken the senses. He stood there for a while, letting the stream wash over his feet, grounding him in the present. Across the river, the meadow opened like a welcome, and he crossed it slowly, the tall grass brushing his legs. Butterflies fluttered through the air, their wings delicate as thoughts. A hawk circled high above, silent and graceful. He lay down in the grass and closed his eyes. The sun warmed his skin, his breath deepened. Around him, the world continued its gentle dance, the chirp of birds, the buzz of bees, the sigh of wind through grass. Time passed unmeasured. When he finally sat up, he realized he had not thought of the stars even once during his walk. Not once had he felt the urge to record or study. His mind had been quiet, his heart open. As he walked back to the village, the stargazer felt lighter. Each step echoed not with longing, but with gratitude. He now understood that walking was its own form of meditation, of presence, of connection, and that sometimes the soft footsteps we leave on earth are as meaningful as any discovery we make in the sky. That night, when he returned to the hill where he once mapped the constellations, he brought nothing but a blanket and himself. He lay beneath the stars, with the gentle weight of the day still wrapped around him, and fell into a deep, contented sleep. The footsteps of his walk remained in the earth behind him, and in his dreams he retraced them not as a path away from the stars, but as one that had brought him gently home. The fruit seller's wisdom. In the village square, beneath a striped canopy that fluttered gently in the morning breeze, stood the fruit seller, a woman whose hands always smelled of citrus and whose laughter could coax smiles even from the most serious of souls. Her cart was a rainbow of colors, deep purples of plums, sun-golden peaches, strawberries with their green crowns still attached, and oranges with pebbled skins that seemed to glisten in the sun. The stargazer had walked past her countless times, always with his head bowed in thought, his mind tangled in constellations and the quiet longing for other worlds. But on this day, drawn by the fragrance of ripe fruit and the soft murmur of morning conversation, he stopped. "Good morning, Dreamwalker," the fruit seller greeted with a grin. "I see the stars let you go early today," he chuckled. "Perhaps they've decided to share me with the earth." "Then you must be hungry," she said, slicing an orange and handing him a wedge. "Start with this. You can't eat the stars, you know." The juice burst on his tongue, bright, sweet, a little tart. It filled his mouth and sent a tingle down his spine. It was more than refreshment, it was memory. He saw a younger version of himself running through the orchard behind his childhood home, the same taste on his lips. "Fruit remembers," the seller said softly, as though she could read his thoughts. "It carries the sun and the rain in its skin, and the earth's laughter in its seeds." He smiled, eyes closed. He had spent so long studying galaxies that he'd forgotten the magic in something as simple as fruit warmed by the sun. She poured him a glass of juice, this time a blend of orange, pomegranate, and a splash of rose water. The scent alone made him feel like he was drifting through a garden at dusk. As he sipped, he felt himself settle into the moment, into his body. The seller patted the edge of her cart. "Come with me," she said. "There's more to see." Together they walked slowly through the village. She pointed out gardens that had just begun to bloom, vines winding up trellises, bees that hovered lazily over lavender. Every stop came with a sample, a slice of apple dusted with cinnamon, a fig as soft as velvet, a tiny spoon of honey that melted like golden light on his tongue. They sat under the shade of a fig tree, sharing a plate of sliced fruit and cheese. Around them, life unfolded in gentle rhythms, neighbors chatting over fences, wind chimes singing in doorways, children laughing in hidden corners. "You don't always have to look up to find beauty," she said. "Sometimes it's growing quietly, waiting to be tasted." He nodded, wiping juice from his fingers, watching the clouds roll overhead. For so long, he had chased wonders in the sky. Now he saw them all around. When the sun dipped low, the fruit seller gave him a small parcel wrapped in cloth, a gift of fruit for the evening. "For your dreams," she said with a wink. That night, he sat beneath the stars, not with his telescope, but with his senses alive. He ate slowly, savoring each bite. The flavors were rich, real, reminders of the ground beneath him and the hands that had offered them. As the constellations blinked into view, he felt no rush to name them. He watched them in silence, his heart full. And when he finally lay back to sleep, it was not stardust he tasted in his dreams, but sweet citrus, warm sun, and the laughter of a friend who had taught him that even fruit could carry the wisdom of the world. The blanket on the mountain. It was the kind of evening that felt like the world was holding its breath. The villagers had been whispering of a gathering. The word passed from doorway to doorway, from baker to blacksmith, from children skipping stones by the creek to elders knitting beneath shady trees. Tonight, they all said, we go to the mountain. The stargazer received the invitation, not in words, but in the sound of footsteps gathering outside his home. He opened the door to find his neighbors standing with arms full blankets slung over shoulders, baskets packed with food and drink, lanterns glowing like bottled starlight. Will you come with us? One asked. He nodded, silently moved, and grabbed his own blanket, worn but warm, and joined the slow procession, winding up the narrow trail to the top of the hill. The climb was long but gentle. The path curved through tall grass and between ancient oaks whose leaves rustled like soft applause. Birds fluttered alongside them, curious. The air grew cooler as they ascended, but the laughter of friends and the scent of bread and herbs kept the chill at bay. At the summit, they spread their blankets in a wide circle. The stars had not yet emerged, but the sky was fading into a dusky blue, the sun slipping slowly below the ridge. The villagers lit their lanterns one by one, placing them between baskets and bottles. They unpacked their food, roasted vegetables, cured meats, warm lentil stew, wheels of soft cheese, fruits bursting with color. The stargazer sat quietly at first, watching the scene unfold around him like a tapestry. He saw the children giggling as they built forts from blankets. He saw the baker breaking bread for an old friend. He saw lovers curled close and old friends resting side by side. He felt, for the first time, what it meant to be part of a constellation made not of stars, but of people. They ate slowly, not for hunger, but for celebration. Every flavor felt like a note in a lullaby. The crisp bite of pickled vegetables, the velvet sweetness of pears soaked in wine, the deep comfort of spiced tea shared in chipped mugs. After dinner, as twilight melted into darkness, the lanterns were dimmed. The villagers lay back in a great circle, blankets tucked under chins, faces turned to the sky. The stargazer lay in the center, and for once he didn't feel alone beneath the cosmos. The stars began to appear, first one, then a few, then hundreds. The sky opened slowly, generously, revealing its stories. The stargazer began to point. There, he whispered, is the archer, and just below him, the fish. Over there, the sisters who dance forever. The villagers watched in wonder. Their eyes reflected the constellations as he spoke gently, his voice like the softest wind. Then he paused. Close your eyes, he said. They obeyed. Now listen, he continued, to the silence of the stars. They say nothing, but they show everything. Let them speak in stillness. And so they lay together, not needing stories anymore, but simply being in the presence of the night. The wind curled softly through the grass, an owl called from a distant tree. Someone sighed deeply and peacefully. Eventually, sleep came not all at once, but like ripples across a pond. One by one, the villagers drifted off, the stargazer last of all. He watched them for a while, his friends, his family, his tiny universe at rest beneath the wide sky. And when he closed his eyes, he dreamed not of distant galaxies, but of lanterns glowing gently in the dark, of laughter rising into the wind, of a night shared by many, stitched together by kindness and stars. The day the stars came down, the morning began like any other, with soft sunlight filtering through the stargazer's curtains and the hum of the village stirring into motion. But something about the air felt different, thicker with warmth, softer with silence. It was as if the stars had left something behind in the sky, a promise not yet spoken. He stepped outside, blinking in the golden light, and for a moment he thought he saw stars glimmering on the rooftops, nestled in the eaves, caught in the dewdrops. But no, those were just sunlit reflections. Still, the feeling lingered that something from the heavens had settled on the earth. The stargazer walked slowly through the village, observing the everyday as though it were new. The cobblestones beneath his feet sparkled faintly. The vines along the baker's house gleamed in the sun. A child pointed at a butterfly and cried, "Look, the stars came down." He paused. There, on the surface of a rain barrel, he saw the glinting reflection of light scattered like a constellation. In the puddles by the well, the same pattern. On the windows, in the glimmer of morning dew. All around him, the sky had made itself known. He continued down the lane, where each doorway was framed by flowers and laughter. Every detail seemed heightened. The warm scent of bread fresh from the oven, the burst of oranges being peeled at the fruit stand, the layered songs of birds hidden in ivy. It was as if the stars had decided to walk among them not as lights in the sky, but as feelings, sensations, presence. In the town square, he met the weaver, who invited him into her shop. "Look," she said, pointing to a tapestry that shimmered in the light. "I wove this from threads dyed with morning. It catches the stars even when they hide." He ran his fingers over the fabric. It felt warm, vibrant, alive. "Do you see it now?" she asked. He nodded. "I think they're everywhere." She smiled, pleased, and sent him off with a piece of cloth wrapped around his shoulders, a shawl that shimmered faintly with each step he took. Later that afternoon, the stargazer sat beneath a fig tree and watched the wind sway the leaves above. As the light shifted, shadows fell like constellations across the ground. A cat wandered by and sat beside him, its fur dappled with sunlight and shade. Even the cat, he thought, seemed touched by the stars. That evening, he didn't need to climb the hill. Instead, he lay in the grass just outside his home, the blanket beneath him, the shawl around his shoulders. The stars rose in their usual order, familiar and steady, but he no longer saw them as distant. He saw them in the way the breeze moved through the grass, in the pattern of petals on the flowers, in the way the candlelight flickered behind a neighbor's window. They had come down, he realized, not to stay forever, but to remind him they had never truly been gone. That night, as he closed his eyes, the stargazer felt surrounded not only by the vastness above, but by the wonder all around him. In his dreams, the stars danced through his village, tucking themselves into gardens and glinting off rooftops, turning the ordinary into something eternal. And when he awoke the next morning, they were still there, softly resting in every corner of his world, waiting to be noticed again. The night he stayed still for most of his life, the stargazer had moved through the world with quiet determination. Night after night, he had walked the hills, tracked the constellations, and charted the sky's great mysteries, even as he learned to enjoy the day, to savor fruit and laughter, gardens and sunlight. A part of him still sought movements, still wandered, still searched. But one night, without planning to, he stayed still. He had placed a blanket just outside his home beneath the old fig tree whose branches had grown thick and wide. The breeze rustled gently through its leaves, and a chorus of crickets began to play the music of twilight. The sky overhead darkened from dusky lavender to deep blue, then black, speckled with silver. But the stargazer did not stand or fetch his telescope. He did not set off on his usual walk. Instead, he lay on his back with a cushion tucked beneath his head, his arms resting at his sides, and his heart unburdened. Stillness embraced him like an old friend. Around him, the world whispered. An owl called softly in the distance. Leaves rustled with secrets. The scent of nearby rosemary, warmed by the afternoon sun, still clung to the air. He listened not for answers, but for presence. He watched the stars, not to study them, but to be with them. Each star seemed brighter that night, as if they, too, had been waiting for him to stop moving. He breathed deeply, inhale, exhale, a rhythm slow and grounding. The breath became a tide in his body, like the slow waves that once rocked him as a child asleep in a boat. Thoughts came and went like clouds. He did not chase them. He watched them pass. Memories floated up, his mother humming lullabies while sewing by lantern light, of his father pointing out constellations from the roof, of lying in cool grass as a boy, wishing he could catch a falling star. Tears welled gently in his eyes, not of sadness, but of tenderness, of remembering, of returning. A soft meow sounded beside him, and the village cat curled up near his arm. He chuckled. Even you came to stay still tonight. The cat purred, its small body warm against his side. In the distance, a lantern flickered in someone's window. Another blinked out. The village was settling too. The world was softening. Above him, the sky stretched endlessly, but he no longer felt small beneath it. He felt held. A breeze brushed across his skin. The branches swayed, and then silence. The kind of silence that lives beneath sound, deep, steady, eternal. He did not need a journey. He did not need a discovery. This night, this stillness was enough. The stars did not move, neither did he. Time unraveled like thread from a spool, loose and easy. Eventually, his eyes grew heavy. The world blurred into softness, and just before he slipped into sleep, he whispered to the sky, "Thank you." The fig leaves rustled one final lullaby, and the stargazer slept, not chasing dreams, but wrapped in them, not reaching outward, but resting inward. Beneath the stars, beneath the tree, beneath the hush of night, he found a quiet that needed no name, and in that quiet, the universe breathed with him. Thank you for joining us on this peaceful journey through the life of the stargazer, through gardens and temples, mountains and meadows, moments of wonder beneath the stars, and gentle stillness here on Earth. We hope these stories helped you find comfort.com and a sense of quiet connection to the world around you and within you. Whether you're listening to fall asleep or simply to rest your mind, know that you're never far from peace. Sometimes it's found in a breath, sometimes in a walk, and sometimes in simply staying still. If you enjoyed this collection, please consider subscribing to the channel and supporting more gentle bedtime stories like this. Your presence here means the world. Wishing you the softest dreams, the coziest sleep, and the warm light of 1,000 stars above you. Good night. The lighthouse keeper's lantern. On the edge of a rugged coast stood an old lighthouse, its white tower battered by wind and salt. Inside lived Elias, the keeper, a quiet man with silver hair and a calm presence. For over 30 years, he had climbed the spiraling stairs each evening, polishing the glass and lighting the great lantern that guided ships through fog and storm. Elias found peace in routine. He drank his tea by the window, watched the seabirds wheel in the sky, and kept logs of weather and tides. Though the world had changed, the lighthouse had not. It stood like a sentinel of memory. One stormy night, thunder growled like an old dog, and the sea raged with wild fury. Elias lit the lantern as always, its golden beam piercing the mist. But as he gazed out, he noticed a strange flicker far below, bobbing in the waves. Curious and concerned, he donned his coat and descended the stairs, stepping into the gale. On the rocks near the shore, tangled in seaweed and driftwood, was a small boat. Inside lay a soaked bundle of child, no older than 7, with pale skin and a tangled mop of dark hair. Elias lifted the child gently and carried him inside, wrapping him in wool blankets by the fire. The boy, whose name was Tom, said little at first. He had no memory of where he came from, only that the sea had taken him. Elias, once a father long ago, felt a quiet stirring in his heart. Days passed, and Tom began to smile, then laugh. He followed Elias everywhere, mimicking his steps, his routines. Elias taught him about the lantern, about how light guides the lost. They charted stars and learned the language of gulls. And with each night, the lighthouse felt less solitary, more like a home. As seasons turned, the townspeople grew curious. One by one, they came to visit, drawn by stories of a boy rescued by the sea and a keeper who had found something long lost. The lighthouse, once a lonely post, became a place of quiet magic. Tom would one day become the new keeper, carrying the lantern's light into the future. But Elias, now content and no longer alone, knew that some storms bring not destruction, but gifts washed ashore, gifts that light our hearts in the darkest of nights. The clockmaker's quiet hour in the heart of a gentle village nestled between hills. There stood an old clock tower, its hands turning with precision thanks to the tender care of Mr. Dorr, the clockmaker. Mr. Dorr was a man of gears and silence, having lived alone for many years above his workshop, surrounded by ticking and talking. He fixed pocket watches, wall clocks, and the great tower mechanism that watched over the village square. Every morning, Mr. Dorr wound the tower. Every evening, he checked its pendulum. His life was measured in minutes, his happiness marked in soft chimes and steady rhythm. But one crisp autumn morning, the great clock did not strike. Villagers paused, puzzled. Mr. Dorr, alarmed, climbed the narrow stairs. To his surprise, nothing was broken. The gears were fine, the weights in place. The clock had simply ... stopped. He waited, listened then, for the first time in years. He stepped away from the mechanism and looked out over the square. Children played, a baker set warm loaves in his window. Leaves danced lazily through the air. Mr. Dorr sat at the edge of the tower and let the moment stretch. That day, he walked through the village, offering warm smiles instead of time checks. He helped a little girl mend her toy watch, told stories to children about clocks that ran on dreams. The next day and the next, the clock remained still. And yet, the village did not fall into chaos. It slowed gently. People lingered longer. They shared tea, took strolls. Mr. Dorr realized something. Time was not only in minutes, but in memories. He began crafting clocks that chimed at unexpected hours, surprising laughter out of quiet homes. He made sundials that glowed with moonlight and hourglasses that whispered wishes. The tower clock remained silent, its stillness a new kind of tick-one that reminded the village of presence over pace. And Mr. Dorr, now with a sparkle in his eye, found that when we let go of time, we often find the most timeless joys. The gardener's moonlight at the edge of a quiet village just beyond the last lamplight. lived a gardener named May. She tended a strange and beautiful garden that bloomed only at night. By day, the garden was still, the plants tucked under silvery leaves, but under the moon it came alive, flowers glowing in shades of blue and gold, vines humming softly, petals opening to starlight. May moved through the garden barefoot, carrying a lantern with a pale flame. She whispered to the plants and listened to their stories, for every flower held a secret. There was the dream bloom, whose scent brought forgotten memories, the star fern, which shimmered when someone nearby felt hope, the luma lily, whose petals changed color based on one's mood. One night, a weary traveler stumbled upon the garden. May welcomed him with a gentle smile and a cup of moonleaf tea. He sat among the glowing plants, and for the first time in years, breathed easily. May gave him a small blossom that pulsed warmly in his palm. It remembers joy, she said. The traveler wept. Word of the garden spread not quickly, but kindly. People arrived in quiet waves, seeking peace, not spectacle. May never asked names. She simply listened, tended, and gave each visitor a flower suited to their soul. And when they left, the garden remained, gently glowing in the moonlight, a sanctuary of stillness where secrets bloomed and hearts grew whole again. The whispering library in the far corner of a forgotten town, where ivy climbed over stone and time moved slowly. There stood a library with no name. Few remembered it, fewer visited. Its doors creaked with age, and its windows were always dusty. One rainy afternoon, a boy named Simon ducked inside, seeking shelter. The silence was deep, the air thick with the scent of old paper. Rows of books lined the she.lves, but it wasn't the sight of them that stopped. Simon, it was the sound, a gentle whisper like leaves brushing together, echoed through the aisles. He followed it to a narrow room lit by a single stained glass window. On a pedestal sat a book, its cover plain. As he opened it, the pages turned themselves, and a voice began to read aloud. The story was about a young traveler, not unlike Simon, who found courage in unexpected places. The voice was warm and steady, like a friend. Simon returned the next day and the next. Each visit, a different book spoke. Some told of distant lands, others of quiet wisdom. Sometimes he cried, often he smiled. Word spread, children came, then adults. The library, once forgotten, became a place of wonder. People brought their own stories, shared memories, found dreams they thought lost. Simon never learned where the voices came from, but he came to believe that stories, once loved, whisper forever, waiting to be heard again. And the library, once silent, now pulsed with 1,000 gentle voices, reading not just books, but hearts. The baker and the sleeping village, in the heart of a village that slumbered soundly each night. there lived a baker named Hugo. Each evening, when the last candlelight flickered out in windows, Hugo lit his own lantern and stepped into his cozy kitchen. While the world slept, Hugo kneaded dough, stirred fruit compote, and sang soft songs to his cat, Myrtle. The scent of cinnamon, honey, and fresh yeast wrapped around the rooftops like a lullaby. Hugo's breads and pastries appeared like magic, each morning warm loaves at doorsteps, sweet rolls in baskets, buttery croissants in the window of his tiny shop. But one night, as a snowstorm curled through the streets, something changed. As he prepared a batch of moonberry buns, Hugo noticed flickers of light outside. Curious, he peered out. Villagers, dozens of them, walked through the snow, sleepy-eyed and drawn by the scent. They gathered outside his shop, holding blankets, lanterns, and quiet wonder. Hugo opened the door. "I didn't mean to wake you," he said. An old woman smiled. "We weren't asleep. Not really. We were dreaming of this." So Hugo poured warm milk and passed out pastries. People sat together on benches, shared stories, and watched snow fall through the golden light. From that night on, once a week, the village stayed half awake. They called it midnight mornings. There was no rush, only rest and sweetness. Children sang lullabies to the stars, and elders spoke of dreams they'd once had. Myrtle the cat curled up in everyone's laps. Hugo learned each person's favorite flavor, not just in taste, but in feeling. And sometimes Hugo would write little notes on the parchment wrapping the bread. "You are seen. Joy is still near. Rest easy." For the villagers, those notes became the beginning of dreams. And Hugo, who had baked in silence for so long, now found joy not just in the bread, but in the hands that held it and the hearts that shared it. The bell of Stillwater Chapel at the edge of the valley, where the mist never quite lifted and the trees leaned close like old friends sharing secrets, stood Stillwater Chapel. Its steeple rose through the fog, crowned by a bell that had not rung in 100 years. The bell was made of old bronze and bore a faded inscription that few could read anymore. Legend said it rang only for moments that truly mattered. Most believed it was just that, a legend. The chapel itself had long been abandoned, save for birds and ivy. Yet every week, a boy named Oliver walked past it on his way to deliver bread for his grandmother. He always slowed down near the chapel, staring at the bell with quiet curiosity. One foggy morning, as Oliver made his way up the winding path, the air shifted. It wasn't colder or warmer, it was stiller. He paused, feeling a weightless hush settle over everything. Then came the sound, a single chime, soft, clear, reverent. Oliver stopped in his tracks. The bell had rung. He looked around. No one was near. The village below, remained in slumber, veiled in mist. Heart pounding gently, Oliver walked to the chapel door, which creaked open without protest. Inside, the wooden pews were dusted with time. The stained glass windows still glowed faintly, casting soft colors across the stone floor. But at the front of the chapel, where the altar stood, something new shimmered. A path of flower petals, wildflowers, fresh despite the season, led down the aisle. Oliver followed them slowly. At the altar, he found a small wooden box. On it rested a note. For those who still believe. He opened the box to find old letters, journals, and tokens of kindness, scraps of memories from villagers long past. They spoke of lost loves, found courage, and the quiet beauty of everyday moments. Oliver read for hours, surrounded by stillness and stories. When he finally left, he carried one letter with him, a message to a future generation about hope in times of doubt. Word of the bell's chime spread. Villagers began visiting the chapel again, drawn by curiosity and comfort. They left letters of their own, messages for strangers, notes of thanks, dreams written on folded pages. The chapel awoke. The bell didn't chime often, only now and then, when someone needed it most. But its silence was never empty. It was full of listening. Oliver grew up to be the chapel's quiet keeper, dusting its pews, tending its garden, and ringing the bell only once a year, on the anniversary of that first foggy morning when the valley stilled and time itself seemed to take a breath. And so, Stillwater Chapel stood not just as a place of worship, but of memory and meaning, a place where silence sang, and a single bell held the weight of 100 stories whispered in the mist. The painter of falling leaves in a quiet cottage surrounded by whispering birch trees lived an artist named Lynn. Each autumn, Lynn emerged with his brushes, his worn easel, and a heart full of colors. He painted the fall, the turning leaves, the golden air, the hush before winter. Lynn did not sell his paintings. He did not show them. He painted for the love of it, hanging each finished piece on the walls of his home until the cottage glowed with amber, crimson, and copper. But one year, as the leaves began to turn, something strange happened. The wind picked up his latest canvas, lifting it high before carrying it into the woods. Lynn chased after it, laughing as the wind danced. He found the painting caught in a tree branch. Below it stood a girl, no more than 10, staring up in wonder. "Did you make this?" she asked. Lynn nodded. She smiled. "It looks like how the woods feel." The girl took the painting to her grandmother. The next day, more children came, hoping to find more pictures in the trees. Lynn, amused and curious, hung a few more in the forest. One by one, villagers found them and brought them home. Soon, the village was wrapped in Lynn's colors. Autumn, which had always whispered softly, now sang, People lingered outside, smiled more, remembered childhoods. Lynn kept painting, and the wind kept sharing. What began as solitary became shared. What was hidden bloomed. Years later, a festival would be held each fall, the festival of falling, leaves celebrating the magic that happens when art and nature meet, and when one quiet heart opens its world to many. The shepherd who followed clouds in the high meadows of a quiet mountain village lived a shepherd named Elias. Each morning he would rise with the sun, lead his sheep to the hills, and spend the day watching the sky. Elias was known for two things: his gentle nature and his love for clouds. While other shepherds counted sheep and mapped grazing routes, Elias lay on the grassy slopes, tracing shapes in the sky. To him, clouds weren't just weather, they were stories, drifting slowly across a blue canvas. He saw dragons curled in sleep, ships with billowing sails, and great winged horses galloping through the heavens. Some villagers thought him odd, but the children adored his tales. "The sky speaks," he often told them. "You just have to listen with your eyes." One afternoon, as he rested beneath an old elm, Elias spotted a peculiar cloud round, glowing faintly and unlike anything he'd seen. It hovered above the ridge, unmoving despite the wind. Curious, he stood and followed it. The sheep trailed behind, as if sensing something important. Over hills and narrow streams they walked, always keeping the strange cloud in sight. By dusk, Elias found himself in a place he'd never been, a hidden valley, ringed with whispering pines and bathed in golden twilight. The air was hushed, as if time had slowed. There, the cloud descended gently, hovering just above a circle of wildflowers. Elias stepped into the circle, heart calm, and the cloud shimmered. Memories unfolded around him, not visions, but feelings, his mother's lullabies. The first snowfall he remembered, the warmth of a fire after a storm. It was as if the sky had gathered pieces of his life and gently returned them. He sat in silence for a long while, understanding without needing words. The cloud, it seemed, had been waiting not for answers, but for attention. When he stood, the cloud rose again, drifting slowly back the way it came. Elias followed. Over the next weeks, he returned to the valley often, sometimes alone, sometimes with children from the village. They'd lie in the grass, tell stories to the sky, and wait for the clouds to answer. Word spread, not of miracles, but of peace. People began taking quiet walks to the high meadows, hoping to see what Elias saw, and even when they didn't, they came back lighter, as though the clouds had carried something heavy away. Elias never claimed to know why the sky had spoken to him. He only knew that listening had changed him. He smiled more, he worried less, and he kept watching. Years later, long after his beard turned silver, Elias was still the shepherd of the clouds. The children he once told stories to had grown, but they brought their own little ones to the meadows, pointing up at the sky. And on quiet days, when the clouds moved just right, they all believed, if only for a moment, that the sky was listening to the lanterns of Meadow Hollow. There is a place the maps do not mark, nestled between the curve of two gentle hills, where the grass hums underfoot and the air carries the scent of honeysuckle and memory. It is called Meadow Hollow, and it is said to come alive only under the soft gaze of the moon. Few remember the path, and fewer still speak of it aloud. But those who wander when the world is quietest, those who walk not with purpose, but with wonder, sometimes find their way there. One such traveler was Leora, a weary soul who had long forgotten how to rest. She had walked for many miles, her thoughts heavier than her pack, her heart dulled by the noise of days too full. One evening, guided only by starlight, she followed a trail of fireflies across a meadow that glowed faintly, as if lit from within. As the moon rose, the path opened wider, revealing a hidden glen ringed by willow trees, and in the heart of it stood hundreds of lanterns, each one suspended from a slender branch or floating gently in the air. They did not burn with fire, but with light that felt like dreams, soft, flickering, and alive with memory. Leora stepped into the hollow and instantly felt the hush settle around her, a deep and comforting quiet. The lanterns began to sway gently, casting light not outward, but inward, illuminating thoughts she had buried deep, her mother's laughter, the first story she ever wrote, the melody her brother once whistled on rainy days. She walked among them, and each lantern she passed seemed to hum a different memory, not just hers, but others. A child's first steps, a farewell kiss, a song sung to a sleeping infant. The lanterns whispered joy, sorrow, hope, but more than that, they whispered peace, the kind that doesn't ask anything of you but to breathe. Leora sat beneath the largest willow and closed her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she rested not just her body, but her thoughts. And as she did, a new lantern appeared above her, glowing warm and golden. It hovered gently, then joined the others, taking its place among the floating constellations of memory. Morning came slowly, with soft lavender light. When Leora awoke, the lanterns were gone, and the meadow looked like any other, but she felt different, lighter, as though she'd left something behind. Back in the world, she carried the hush of Meadow Hollow with her. She smiled more, listened deeper, and took slow walks beneath the moon, just in case the lanterns returned. And sometimes, when the night was especially quiet, she swore she saw a flicker in the trees, a gentle light, waiting to welcome another traveler home. For in Meadow Hollow, peace is never lost. It simply waits to be found. The window with no view in a weathered stone cottage perched on the edge of a quiet sea cliff. There was a window that looked out on nothing, not the ocean, not the sky, just a soft pale blur that never changed, like fog frozen in place. The window was tall and narrow, framed by driftwood and lace curtains. Generations had lived in the cottage, but no one could explain why that one window refused to show the world. Some believed it was cursed. Others said it looked into the past. An elderly woman named Mira lived there now. She'd inherited the cottage from her grandmother, who'd once said, "The window waits for the right eyes." Mira never asked what that meant. For years, she dusted the windowsill, opened the shutters each morning, and saw nothing but the blur. She didn't mind. The rest of the cottage had charm enough to see breeze through the kitchen door, sunlight dappling the floorboards, and a wood-burning stove that hummed with every flame. Each evening, Mira made tea and sat near the strange window, rocking slowly and humming lullabies to herself. It was a quiet life, and she liked it that way, until one evening when the blur began to shift. It started with a flicker of gold, faint and soft, like the glint of sun on water. Mira leaned in. For the first time, she saw movement. Shapes emerged, clouds, perhaps, or memories, then colors. A forest in autumn, a child laughing beside a stream, a small hand grasping a dandelion puff. Mira's breath caught. These were not just images, they were moments hers. The window was showing her life, but not as a mirror. It revealed the feelings she'd forgotten: wonder, courage, love. The sound of her father's voice telling bedtime stories, the warmth of her mother's hands braiding her hair, the weightless joy of her first swim. Every evening, the window offered more, not an order, not with explanations, just fragments, like seashells washed ashore, a dance in the rain, the first snowfall of a faraway winter, the scent of peaches in summer. Mira began to change. She laughed more, even when alone. She started sketching again, filling pages with what the window showed her. And one day, she opened her cottage to neighbors who hadn't visited in years. They came curious about the woman who once kept to herself. She poured them tea and told them stories, not just of what the window showed, but what she remembered. "It's not a view," she said one evening. "It's a reflection of what matters, of what endures." Word spread of the window with no view, and soon others came to sit with Myra. Sometimes the window remained blank, but often when someone truly listened to the sea, to the silence, it shimmered, and they would leave lighter, carrying something quiet and beautiful within them. When Myra's time finally came, the window stayed lit for 3 full days, glowing softly in the night, like a lantern of memory. Afterward, the cottage remained. Others tended it, rested there, watched the strange window, and though no one ever quite understood it, all who visited agreed. It wasn't about what they saw, but what they felt, and sometimes that was everything.